we bring you a chilling short story titled, Everyone Lives, but Not Everyone Dies. Everybody dies. That's common knowledge. I learned it when I was 5 when my hamster met a hawk for the first and last time. It was my fault for taking him outside, but that only made the discovery harder. Everything dies. Everything in the history of the world, up to about 100 years ago, has died. We take that as proof that we're going to die too, although we don't know for certain until we're actually gone, and by then it's too late to know anything for certain. As long as we're still alive, it feels like there is a chance, no matter how improbable, that we are the exception. That somehow everyone else in the world will die, while we will live forever. I hope some of you just thought about Louis C.K.'s bit about everybody dying. That's what was playing on TV when Grandmother Ellis entered the room. "Don't listen to that man," she said. "Not everybody dies." Of all the objectionable things Louis C.K. jokes about, I can't believe this is the topic she chose to argue. Of course not, Granny. You're not going anywhere. There is no point in arguing with old people about absolutely anything. Even when they're wrong, they've grown accustomed to being wrong too long for the facts to keep up. "Oh, I'm going to die," she said, laboriously sitting down next to me. "When you get to 84, you can't put a roast in the oven without wondering if you'll be around to take it out. But not everybody dies. My grandfather is 143 years old. That's not possible. Was it? I've heard some people live to be ancient, but I'm pretty sure no one makes it to 143 without the devil's private medical insurance. He was born in Belgium in 1874, but he lives nearby now." "How do you know?" "He still sends me a birthday card every year. I have them up in the attic somewhere." "But how do you know he's the one sending the cards?" I pressed. "When was the last time you visited him?" "I never visit. I have nothing to say to him." That's all she would say about the subject, but my curiosity wasn't nearly satisfied. I found the birthday card in a shoebox along with 83 other cards. I think they were all hand-drawn and colored, but the older ones were warped and yellowed by time and water damage. Within each card was inscribed an address alongside this verse: "One less year for you to wait, before your sweet release. One till you shed your mortal fate, and live with me in peace." It sounds to me like he was offering grandmother an escape from death. I can't imagine that he really had a cure, but I wouldn't turn down that offer if it was handed to me. Visiting old people is a chore. Visiting ancient people is an adventure. I plugged the most recent address into Google Maps, and it led me to a Victorian-era estate house on the edge of town. It looked like nobody has lived here for years. Even if the old guy was a myth, it would be fun to just poke around and have a look. I climbed up the rotting porch and knocked on the door, leaving an imprint in the dust the shape of my fist. I hope he doesn't break a hip on his way to let me in. He probably has some live-in medical staff if he's lasted this long though. When the door swung open, a tall thin man with rigid posture and a pristine suit stood before me. He was wearing an old-fashioned plague mask and black leather gloves, so I couldn't see his skin. By the way he was standing though, I figured he couldn't be that old. Hi. Does Mr. Jacobs still live here?" He didn't move. One arm was held behind his back at a perfect right angle. A corpse couldn't have held more stolid composure. "He sent my grandmother this card. And like 80 other cards, one every year." I produced the birthday card, and the man snatched it like a striking snake. The card disappeared into his pocket without a glance. He turned wordlessly and entered the house, leaving the door open behind him. "Sit." The figure gestured at an elaborately embroidered armchair which the Queen of England wouldn't have looked out of place in. The whole house was absolutely magnificent, while the outside was dilapidated enough to be seen on a We Buy Ugly Houses poster. The interior was immaculately preserved. Dark mahogany wood panels, crystal chandelier, intricate golden light fixtures, and shelves and alcoves stuffed to bursting with all manner of exotic dolls, carvings, and trinkets. "Why did Ellis send you?" he asked. The voice had a peculiar hollow ring as it reverberated inside the mask. The words were slightly clipped, but his English was flawless. He continued to tower over me as stiff as a flag pole. My hands ran self-consciously over one another in my lap. I was tempted to admit I came on my own, but the card seemed specifically for my grandmother, and I didn't want to be turned away. Idle curiosity doesn't open nearly as many doors as blatant lies. My grandmother, Ellis, she wanted me to meet Mr. Jacobs for her. I am Mr. Jacobs. Then, she wanted to let me decide whether to accept your offer. I didn't know what it meant, but it was just vague enough to work. He bent over me, the long nose of the mask practically scratching my skin. The slow intake of breath. Was he sniffing me? I fought the urge to be sick when a wave of the thick incense within the mask washed over my face. Apparently satisfied, the man moved to sit across from me on the other side of the marble coffee table. He poured a glass of red wine from a silver decanter for me before pouring another for himself. His long body leaned back, crossing lithe legs with the dexterity of a dancer. Polished leather shoes flashing softly in the dull light. There is no way this guy is 143 years old. Drink, he said, the thick perfume billowing out of the mask. I'm not old enough to. How old are you, boy? 19. How old are you? Are you old enough to fear death? He asked. I nodded. Then you are old enough to drink. I was getting really uncomfortable at this point. My hands wouldn't sit still. Maybe I was in over my head. I was just curious, that's all. I didn't really believe he was 143 years old. If he really did have a cure for death, why wouldn't my grandmother accept it? I think there's been a mistake. I think I should be going now. I started to stand, but he was faster. He stepped directly over the coffee table and blocked me from getting out of the overstuffed chair. The perfume was intoxicating. I couldn't think straight. Whatever I tried to focus on just blurred out in my mind. All I could see was the piercing red wine taunting me from the table. The only sounds were my beating heart, and his melodic voice echoing from the mask. Is this a game to you, boy? Are you trying to play me? No, sir, Do you seek to fool me? To rob me? To take my secrets, and sell them for your own gain? I swear I only came because my head was spinning. The crystal chandelier flashed as bright as a lighthouse. The scent was overwhelming. It was all I could do just to avoid throwing up. Even if he weren't blocking me in, I don't know if I could have stood to leave. Because what? Why are you here? Why have you disturbed my home? He was shouting now, at least I think he was. My senses were so saturated with noise and light and smell. I shut my eyes tight. I pressed my hands over my ears so tightly I could feel them pop somewhere deep within my head. I don't want to die, I shouted. I could have said anything else, but that's the only thought my mind could hold on to. Then drink. My eyes were still closed, but I could feel the glass of wine being shoved into my face, spilling over my chest. I grabbed it with both hands and gulped it down like I had been lost in the desert for years. Mr. Jacobs' presence immediately lifted. He must have moved away to the other side of the coffee table again. That all-consuming perfume began to clear from the air, but I kept drinking. I didn't want to die. I don't care what happened to me in that moment. I never wanted to die. Crunch. Something hard slipped into my mouth from the bottom of the wineglass. I opened my eyes. The bottom of the glass was crawling with beetles. I tried to cough, but the one already in my mouth slipped down my throat. I could feel its legs struggling against my esophagus all the way down. Do not worry, child. Mr. Jacobs' voice was soft as a purring cat. You never will. Now go home, and do not return without your grandmother. I got up and ran. Once outside, I fell to my hands and knees and heaved on the ground. I forced my fingers down my throat, but I didn't need much help to induce the vomiting. The red wine poured out in waves, splattering all over my hands and knees. Still gasping for breath, I ran my hands through my own vomit, searching. It was all liquid. I squeezed the wet dirt with my hands. The beetle hadn't come out. I took off my shirt and pants which were soaked in vomit, and put them in the back of my car. I drove home, trying my best to pretend nothing happened. But it was hard not to think about when I could feel the beetle crawling around in my stomach the whole way back. I don't know what that beetle I swallowed was, but it's doing something to me. The squirming sensation had abated for a while, and I figured it would be digested. I wasn't feeling as nauseous anymore, so it probably wasn't poisonous. I told myself he was just some crazy hermit who got his wrinkled old rocks off by playing tricks on people. It wasn't that my grandmother was afraid of him. She must have just known he was a fraud. I was almost home before the sharp pain in my stomach doubled me over the steering wheel. It was like an ice-cold knife trying to force its way out from the inside. I had to pull off into a gas station to wait for it to pass. The pain quickly faded into a gentle numbness, the sensation replaced by a soft tickling working its way up my chest cavity. I lifted my shirt and fought the urge to be sick again. There was a lump under my skin, and it was moving. I poked at it gingerly, and could feel the hard carapace of the beetle underneath. It must have bitten free from my stomach and begun to crawl around. I briefly considered trying to smash it, but what if I didn't kill it? What if I just made it mad and it went on a rampage inside of me? The lump wasn't moving fast, but it was persistently crawling toward my heart. I took a deep breath and felt it holding onto my ribcage as it expanded and contracted. The hospital. Now. I slowly pulled out of the gas station, trying not to turn the wheel too fast for fear of agitating the beetle. It reacted to even small movements, biting and scratching in protest. I don't care if they made me drink a whole bottle of bleach, I was getting this thing out of me. I pulled right up to the emergency room doors and left my car there. I practically had to crawl up to the desk to keep the beetle still. For every foot I made, it was wriggling a few centimeters closer to my heart. What would happen when it got there? Somebody help me! I shouted, lying down on the ground to keep it still. I stared at my reflection in the polished floor tiles, now damp with the cold sweat flowing down my face. Was I delirious? The face looking up at me couldn't be my own. I was so old. My hair was gray and patchy, my eyes sunken and hollow, and a network of lines mapped the journeys of an unlived life. I tried to touch my skin, but the jerking movement caused the beetle to bite down hard on one of my lungs. I was coughing blood when the nurses lifted me into a stretcher. I slipped in and out of consciousness after that. The nurses later told me that I kept mumbling, "I don't want to die. I want to live forever." Any allergies? No. Medications? No. Please think hard. It's rare for someone your age not to be on any medications. I glared at the doctor who perched on the end of my hospital bed. I don't know how long I've been here, but it was afternoon when I went to visit Mr. Jacobs, but now the morning sun was filling my room. I squinted against it, then back at my doctor. He looked bored and annoyed and fuzzy. I squinted again. "I'm 19 years old," I said. The events of the other day immediately came back to me, and I clutched at my chest. Ancient withered hands held loosely together by a mesh of bulbous veins gripped my hospital gown and pulled it open. I couldn't feel any lump, but was this really me? My skin sloughed into sagging pouches around my skeletal frame. I was more than old. I was what old could only dream about becoming when it grew up. "Do you remember what year it is?" the doctor asked. "Don't worry if you can't. It's common with cases of delirium. It's April 13th, 2017. I'm not delirious. I'm 19 years old, and was perfectly healthy yesterday. There's something inside of me which is causing this." Causing what, exactly? He was writing something down in his notepad, but he wasn't really listening. He must deal with a dozen old people every day, each more blithering and nonsensical than the last. But if they could find the beetle and reverse this. "I want a full body scan." "You've already been checked. It was probably nothing but heat exhaustion which caused you to feel dizzy. I'd like to keep you here through the afternoon and get you rehydrated, and then you'll be as good as ever. Is there anyone you'd like us to notify?" "My grandmother." He raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Just give me the damn phone." Grandmother Ellis and I stared at each other. She recognized me the moment she walked in the door. She didn't say a word, just pursed her lips and sat down. She opened her handbag and began fiddling with something inside. "I'm sorry," I said. "This was all my fault. I should have asked her before visiting Mr. Jacobs. I should never have gone through her stuff in the attic without permission, or pretend I was supposed to accept Mr. Jacobs' offer on her behalf." She took out a hand mirror from her purse and held it up to me. I screwed my eyes shut tight. "Look at what you've become." I forced myself to look. If I, the old me, had seen someone who looked like I did now, I would have made some cruel joke about old people outliving their usefulness. Now I felt like I wanted to cry, if these puffy old eyes could even do that anymore. "My grandfather doesn't know how to extend life," Ellis said. "He shifts it from one person to another. The only reason he has lasted this long is because he passes his years into a victim who must bear his burden in his stead. So the reason you never accepted his offer? Because I couldn't do that to someone else. One lifetime is more than enough if used properly, and 1,000 lives aren't nearly enough when used as he has done. But I only want one life, I swear," I said. "And I can get it back, right? All I have to do." "No. You do not have the right to give your years to anyone. But I could give them back to Mr. Jacobs." She shook her head. "You will not win. He has been doing this for over 100 years. If you go back to him, he will only add to your years until you've been turned to dust. He told me not to return without you. If you accept his deal." Grandmother Ellis put her mirror away. I hated how much her hands were shaking. "I'm sorry. I can't do it. Please don't leave me like this," I said. "There's hardly anything left of you to leave," and she was gone. I wanted to say more, but my words caught on a dry itching in my throat. I felt like I was suffocating, and if that had been the end, I would have accepted it. I'd rather die than live like this. But the itching turned into squirming, and the squirming into thrashing. I clutched at my throat, but I was helpless as the beetle crawled up my trachea and out of my mouth. It plopped down into my lap, and I held it in my hands. But these weren't my years. This wasn't my fault. If I could just pass them off to someone else, then I'd rather die than live like this. But I'd rather live forever than either.